I just want to take the time for a brief second, not to share with you any inspirational, Jesus, Spirit-filled wisdom, but just to take the time to say, I love you. I was just thinking about you this morning, and I was thinking about y'all this weekend, and how excited I was that I'm just here being with y'all. So just, you bless me. So thank you, and thank you, Pastor Candace. But enough of that mushy-gushy stuff. In school, I want to tell you, I was a very bright kid.
No.
Yes. I was also very shy as well. I was. But we're not going to talk about that. I did well academically. I was a bright student who excelled in many areas academically in school. English, history was my favorite, foreign languages, some of the humanities type work, art, drama, and music. And side note, before Jesus found me again and called me to this, that at one point in time I was going to be a history and a Spanish teacher. Now, I have to say it would be a little difficult teaching Spanish in the current accent that I have. But what you didn't hear me... That's funny. But what I really struggled with was not just the humanities, but what I struggled with was the idea of math. And when I was in high school, the state of Georgia made me take 3 high school classes in math before I could graduate. And then they made me do what was called the Georgia High School Graduation Exam to make sure that I was proficient in math skills. Well, I could do math relatively well through middle school and especially in 9th grade when I took Algebra 1. That wasn't an issue at all. I could find the X's and the Y's and all this other kind of stuff. But once I got into geometry, Lord have mercy, they started talking about proofs and circumference and area and finding the rectangular prism. I mean, what the heck is a rectangular prism? I was just lost on it. It was just an absolute nightmare, and I really couldn't wrap my head around it. Well, by the grace of God only, I passed. And I went on to Algebra 2, which was a little bit easier for me. Well, when I got to the University of Georgia, I was required to take 2 math classes. I'm like, God, just keep on going. And one of them was mathematical modeling. And let me tell y'all, I'm not afraid of the devil because I had my mathematical modeling teacher. She was a fierce to be reckoned with, let me tell you. The first day I had this professor, she was mean. She was absolutely mean and horribly unapproachable. The very first day we were in class, one of the students raised his hand and said, well, what do we call you? You will call me Dr. Dooley. Okay. We will call you by her, in which, I will give homage and honesty and respect to her for having that position and that title. But the manner she told us was just so snobbish and arrogant and rude. Absolutely. We never could ask her questions in class. And when someone asked her a question, she says, well, that's what I have office hours for. That's why you will come to my class for office. You don't come to my class to ask questions. Well, all right then. And one of us asked, well, what are we supposed to do if we can't come to your office hours? We have another class, or we have another commitment, or we have something. She said, oh, well, it's your loss, isn't it? This was a professor. The final exam season was upon us, and there were just some concepts I just couldn't grasp. I couldn't quite grasp the idea of mathematical modeling. We were using graphing calculators and stuff, and I just didn't get it. So I attended her office hours and asked her about my final exam. Oh boy. She told me, you know what? You did really well. I did. I did well. She did well. She didn't know me at all, actually. She had no idea who my name was. She didn't know me. And then she went to my exam and she said, Oh, no, you didn't, did you? You know, I'm in the sanctuary of the Lord, so I'm not going to tell you what I was thinking at the time. But she showed me a 56 out of 100. That's not good. Needless to say, that was my only D in college. But apparently, I didn't need to become successful anyway. I didn't need her to become successful, so the joke was on her. Yeah, you can clap at that one. That's okay. And in our passage this morning, and in preparing for this sermon, you know, I was also asking the same question about Jesus. Jesus, are you really joking? Are you really kidding? Did you really say this in your sermon? Because that's not how we know you. That's not the way we know you. We don't know you like that. Because our passage this morning is not how we would usually describe Jesus, would it? I mean, think about it. We understand Jesus to be the peace that passes all understanding, don't we? We also think about Jesus being someone who unites all of us into one big happy family at this heavenly banquet as we walk with Him in the present circumstances of our life. Right? That's how we would describe Jesus, I would assume. But Jesus doesn't say that this morning. As a matter of fact, I had a hard time trying to say, but you didn't mean that, did you? Did you really mean what you say and say what you mean? Jesus signals that He comes to bring division and conflict as He looks to the future. And the word that one commentator had said was the word of foreboding. It was a struggle. It was a tough passage to read and to write, and even to write the sermon upon, because that's not how we would normally describe Jesus, would it? It's difficult to comprehend because of the serious and conflicting statements we have in this text and the circumstances we normally ascribe to Jesus or our faith tradition. So we are placed this morning in the middle of a long narrative. And this is why I like Luke. Luke writes in painful detail about the journey that Jesus takes from Samaria all the way to Jerusalem, from chapter 9 to chapter 19. Because at the end of this journey that we're going on, Jesus comes to Jerusalem, and what awaits Him is the crucifixion, His condemnation, and ultimately death. And even though we proclaim Jesus to be the Son of God, and even though we say that Jesus is all divine, I believe that this morning we get a glimpse of Jesus' all-encompassing humanity. I believe that Jesus was all divine, fully divine. And sometimes we forget that Jesus was also fully human. Because I think that in order for Jesus to fully understand what His followers are going to go through, there has to be an understanding for Him to be fully human. So don't forget it. Fully divine, fully human. And we see that in verse 50. When Jesus says, in the version that I use, that He says, stress until this is completed. Jesus was under an enormous amount of stress. Did you see that? Did you read that in the text? Jesus was under an extreme amount of stress. Jesus knew His circumstances and the weight that He carried on His shoulders, figuratively, and we will see during the Easter narratives literally when He carries the cross. He knew what polarizing character He was. And He knew the kind of character that polarized people as He moved forward into this movement. He knew what kind of polarizing force He would be in our day. Think about it. In the Western world, we are fine with Christianity. Christianity is the majority religion or faith tradition. But in places like Asia, the Middle East, Africa, it's not. And Christians, followers of Jesus, are still becoming persecuted, just like we were back in the 4th and 5th centuries. He knew what kind of polarizing character he would become. As he foretells his ultimate and untimely death to his disciples. And, as we see at the ending of our passage, the crowd who apparently follows him. Jesus wasn't alone in this struggle. He was being followed by hundreds of people. Many people were following him on his way from Samaria to Jerusalem. So with all this pressure, with all this stress that he had on him, the fully human Jesus, it is easy to see the incredible and enormous amounts of pressure Jesus is facing as he travels his way to the cross and to death. But Jesus continues. Jesus continues as he talks about the idea of division. He explained to his disciples. He explained to his disciples and the crowds that he is going to be that polarizing figure. And that ultimately he will divide the families. 3 against 2, 2 against 3, 1 against 4, 4 against 1. And the family was the hallmark of the Jewish tradition. And it still is. Family, keeping things together, uniting people as one unit. Jesus said, no! I'm going to divide you. I am going to be a force that will stick a wedge in the middle. By the time the author of Luke writes his accounts, which historically was 2 or 3 generations after Jesus had died, division was subsequently the rule and not the exception. You hear me? Division was the rule. Families in the Jewish tradition were split up as Jesus died and people were beginning to write stories about him and Paul made his travels. Division was the rule and not the exception. Because there was these families who were devoted to their Jewish tradition, to their Jewish custom, to their Jewish faith. This is part of them. They came to synagogue. They came to all of these places together as a unit. And then Jesus comes along. And one person in that family, wait a minute. I don't know about all this. Let me follow Jesus. There were others who were kind of towing the middle line. I was going to hold tight to my Jewish tradition and to my Jewish faith. And there were some who said, I won't hold tight to it, but there's this man named Jesus who challenges. The vision was already being enforced, so to speak. It was division. It's not like how it was now, where Judaism is over here and Christianity is over here. They were very closely tied together. And Jesus knew it. The apostles, after Jesus died, they knew it. Division was being created. Jesus knew that his followers would endure extreme stress just as he did on his way to Jerusalem. You know what? I was watching this documentary, Creating a Class. And in this class, I was looking at the history of Christianity the first 2,000 years. Oh boy. Do I have something in store for you? So in this video, they were talking about the first Christian followers after Jesus' death. And these followers were hunted down. They were being subjected to ridicule, torture, death. We see that in the accounts that Paul, the Apostle Paul, was killed. Peter, upon this rock, Peter was crucified. Stephen was stoned. It wasn't easy being a follower of Jesus during the first centuries. It was not easy being a follower of Jesus. So Jesus knew that his followers would endure extreme stress. Jesus also knew that his followers would be divided against each other as he looked toward the future and saw events that would help to usher in a dominion of God. And on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus knew what would happen to his followers as they went out in his name, that his message would have the capacity to divide and to subtract from families, faith traditions, and systems that they have held dear for centuries. Jesus was a revolutionary. Jesus knew what was going to happen. This is when the fully divine part comes in. He was the Son of God, and even though he had extreme stress, he knew what was going to happen. And he was trying to prepare his followers for what was going to take place. Stress and division. Y'all, who ain't stressing this morning? Come on, tell the truth, shame the devil. Who ain't stressed in this moment? We all are stressed at some point in time in our life. Lord have mercy, I'm stressed in this current moment. Come back, say, Pastor. She's smiling. We are all under a lot of due stress. We are all under a lot of due stress. And sometimes that stress can create turmoil in our lives, in our spirituality, in ourselves, in our core of our beliefs. I think sometimes when we get stressed, we tend to say things that we don't mean, and we end up building resentment and regret for the things that we said, or the things that we wish we would have said, or the things we should have kept quiet about in the beginning. Right? Sometimes that stress causes division. I was reading a biography on George Washington because I'm still holding tight to my history buff side. And during the early days of George Washington's presidency, there was this extreme amount of division. They were a very small country at the time, we were. And there was all this division because of philosophical ideas. And it ended up creating all this tension. And this tension built up to polarizing figures in American politics. Can you believe that? Parties were constructed based on these philosophical ideas. Division was created and not unity. And that is the consequence of division and stress. But let me tell you something. Let's talk about how we can put it back together again. I think the consequences of stress and division are there. But as we, get this, add and multiply the values of our spiritual and personal selves, we do that as we live into our calling with authenticity. That was good. I don't know if I can. Let me try it again. We know the consequences of division and subtraction and stress. But I want us to try on the addition and multiplying the values of our spiritual and personal selves by living into our calling with authenticity. Living into our callings is not necessarily popular. Just like Jesus, it can be a polarizing force in our families. It can upset the balance and turn everything topsy-turvy. It can cause stress and division amongst our lives and among others that we care about. I'm reminded of this on my own calling to ministry. A few years ago, 2005, not that long. When I decided to step into my calling for pastoral ministry, I was sitting at my grandfather's table, and my grandfather was the Southern Baptist minister. I was sitting at his kitchen table, and I was on vacation at the time. A lot of good things happen to me when I'm on vacation. You're going on vacation instead of But when I was sitting at my grandfather's table, we were sitting there talking, and my grandfather said all of a sudden, "Son!" And he had his finger. Only good Southern men do. My grandmother was just as bad. She said, "Son, God is calling you to be a bivocational minister." I said, "Hang up the phone. Hang it up. I don't want it. Hang it up." And my dad, when I was talking to him about it, he said, "Son," he said, "when you were born, the very first words out of my mouth was that I pray that God will protect you and that God will call you to be a pastor." He said that, and that was 5 seconds out of the blue. I said, "You didn't know how right you were." But then he told me, let me step back. My mother, being that she was the Southern Baptist pastor's daughter, she was sensing, she's the banker, and sensed that the bottom line would not be financially successful as a minister. And she was opposed to it. She saw that in my current position that I was at in that very moment, she knew what good things I had. It was rent-free. I didn't have to pay for water. I didn't have to pay for cake. I had a $1,000 meal plan a semester, which didn't feed me then, but that's all right. I had free cable, free trash, free electricity, and free water. I was living a good life. As we say in the South, I was living high on the hog. So my mother was dead against it, because in her mind it was unconceivable. Needless to say, the division that my calling gave me divided my family. It further caused undue problems due to financial, emotional, and physical burdens and strain my calling placed upon me in seminary and throughout the different kind of journeys that I was in California. And then my dad had the wisdom to see what kind of church I was becoming ordained in. And then that's when he recalled that conversation to me. And he said, "Son, I just don't know. I just don't know." He said, "I cannot believe this." He said, "I prayed." And that's when he told me that. That's when he prayed that I would become a pastor. He said, "So when I saw that you were becoming part of this weird, different church," he said, "it kind of confused me. It frustrated me. It aggravated me. It gave me fits. I was mad. I wanted to become a Pentecostal pastor." Praise Jesus. He said, "So I didn't know what to do." He said, "But then the Holy Spirit came." He said, and the Holy Spirit said, "When you prayed for your son to become a pastor, you never indicated what church." And then my dad said, "So it's okay." I said, "You can't come right." There were moments of fear. There were moments of stress. But I want to tell you something. I made it through. I fully resurrected myself because I stepped into my calling with authenticity. And I said, this may cause me stress. This may cause what little hair I have left to come out. And I said, this may cause division in my family. But you know what? I'm going to step into the calling because God called me to this. And I'm going to live in it with authenticity and fullness of God. And God requires the same thing of you. Step into your calling. Be true to who you are. Never let anybody tell you any different. You are you because God made you the way you were to be. Don't let anybody tell you different. When I stepped into my calling, there was authenticity, there was courage, there was life. And I knew that God was behind me all the way. And I think our message this morning points to that. Jesus was challenging us to do something unthinkable. To understand that our calling will divide and it will subtract. It will cause stress and it will cause division. But folks, the additions and the multiplication that will be added to your life as a result is going to be powerful. It will tear our foundations apart. It will tear pieces of you away. But let me tell you, the things that will be added to you will be beyond our comprehension. But you got to do it. It ain't easy. Following Jesus ain't easy. Stepping into your calling will not be easy. But there is a family at this church. There is a family around you who will support you, who will love you, who will encourage you, who will give you love, who will support you all the way because they know that you have been called to what God has called you to do. Live it with authenticity. We expect nothing different. Don't sit back, as I said before, in your marshmallow palaces thinking you're going to let somebody else do it. God is calling you to do it, Miss Barbara. God is calling you to do it, Dave Barton. Pastor Candace, God is calling you to do it. Do it, and do it well. And always, make it count. Amen. Amen.